So here you go, attempting to push the blame off onto capitalism, as if it's capitalism's fault for the sake of all this rubble lying everywhere, and it looks like there's been a tsunami. Who's to say that this problem didn't occur through a weather disaster, such as a hurricane, or a tsunami, or a tornado, or any of these type of things? I could easily point out socialist economies and say, oh look at all this poverty, and say, oh look, socialism. We can see that the freer economies are doing far better off than those on the oppressed end of the scale. And it just so happens to be that on this freedom index, the freest economies are those that are strongly capitalist, whereas those on the opposite end of the scale are those that are strongly socialist. For example, Venezuela is socialist, that of Hong Kong is more capitalist.
We are surrounded by capitalism. Not only do we live under this system, each of us is another cog in this massive machine.
And this is a lie. We do not live in a capitalist system. To say is to ignore the fact you live in a mixed economy.
We are instrumental in its proper function, and hence only we have the power to elicit change. We have been told that capitalism is great by politicians, by economists, by teachers, even our own families. But that vision is far from reality.
Well, if you're someone who tries to pass off today's system as being capitalist, then I can understand where you're coming from. Because we faced the Great Depression because of your socialism. We faced the banking crisis because of your socialist government protectionism that led bad banks to become too big to fail because of all your socialist subsidies.
Capitalism is a contradictory and flawed system even in its most successful manifestations. In the United States, arguably the wealthiest nation in the world, homelessness and unemployment are rampant.
I am not surprised why the United States of America today is faced with that problem in a mixed economy, where your socialism strangled capitalism half to death through strong government regulation and restricted supply. Your social security drove the debt level sky high because of all the unpaid pensions, because of the social security the country cannot afford. But people such as yourself cling on to it for dear life. And it comes at a cost, just like all your so-called free goodies come at a cost. Like all the free goodies in Scotland. It doesn't just come for free. You have to pay for it somehow. And how you pay for it is seeing your costs of living drive up through the roof.
Schools are crumbling, and those lucky enough to get into universities are crushed by mountains of debt they'll never escape from.
This reminds me of the medical schools. You close them down so that you have a shortage of the medical skills available. And even in 1996, there was 44,000 applicants who applied for medical school, and there was only 16,000 placements available. And then you question why the costs soared through the roof. The answer's simple. It's called the laws of supply and demand. That's what determines price.
People suffer in hospital waiting rooms, sometimes even die, simply because they can't afford treatment.
Yes, simply because they can't afford treatment. So, through your socialist government intervention, creating the AMA monopoly, where you closed down 168 medical schools, again, what's that got to do with capitalism, as capitalism is about the free market? It's not the free market's fault for why 168 medical schools get closed down. That's your own fault. That's through your socialist government intervention that created a monopoly. And after closing down all those medical schools and seeing the US population vastly increase through the laws of supply and demand, a shortage of medical doctors, and a vast increase of the US population, voila, there you have your medical costs soaring out of control. And then we have the over-regulation of the private sector that resulted in smaller hospitals not being able to afford to consume the cost of the heavier government regulation, which forced them into closure, meaning less supply of hospitals available, and again giant hospitals gaining a monopoly over the marketplace, increasing, demand in an area of a shortage, and your healthcare costs soar out of control. But most importantly, a free market in healthcare means that there is a straight transaction between the consumer and the provider. Now, I am in Scotland. I have never been to the United States of America in my entire cream puff. Never. Since I've never been to the United States of America, how come I know more about your healthcare system than you do through what we call a third-party payer system? Do you know what a third-party payer system means? It means someone else other than the consumer is determining the cost. That's right, a third party is determining, has a monopoly over what the cost is. A capitalist system means the consumer has the free choice to shop around for the cheaper cost. And there is a straight transaction between the consumer and the provider. And I can tell you for a fact, your American healthcare system, for a fact, not an opinion, is not like that. You do not have a straight transaction between the consumer and provider. You have a third party in the background determining what your cost is for healthcare. And those just so happen to be the private pharmaceutical companies. Who was it that created the collusion between the private pharmaceutical companies? The government, through the third-party payer system, creating the monopolised system in the first place. So, whose fault is it for restricting competition? Whose fault is it for taking it away from the consumer for the consumer to shop around freely? It's your own fault. And then you try to blame capitalism for it. It's erroneous.
It's not a problem of a lack of medicine, or equipment, or personnel. It's a problem of inhumanity.
How the hell can you sit there and say that it's not the fault of a lack of personnel when you close down 168 medical schools? Even within the first 3 years of 25 medical schools being closed down, there was a 50% reduction of medical doctors available on the market. What the high price in the market signifies is scarcity. There is a scarcity of medical doctors available on the market to that of the massive scale of demand that cannot keep up with it, which is why your medical costs are out of control. Because of your government intervention.
Someone is denied the right to live, the right to a healthy life, because they don't have enough money to pay for horrifically overpriced treatment.
I do not agree with the overpriced treatment, but to sit there and say that you have a right to healthcare is nonsense. You do not have a right to healthcare because a right means you have an entitlement.
Food insecurity is a problem in this wealthiest nation on earth. People go hungry, while excess unsold food is thrown into the trash. People are thrown en masse into prisons on trumped-up charges and minor offenses, because justice has become a private industry run in the interest of profit.
The problem that we have is that we have this overgrown, oversized government that's become too big for its own boots. That's what the problem is. And that was all to blame on your socialism. That's got nothing to do with capitalism.
Inequality is increasing across the globe.
Just like the same inequality where between 1975 in the United States of America to 1991, the poorest quintile in the bottom 20% moved up the ladder by $27,000 plus in wages, whereas the richest in America only increased by $4,000 in wages in that same time period, meaning that the poor grew richer faster and the rich grew richer. What have you got to say to that?
A handful of the richest few own more than the billions at the bottom. Not through hard work or intelligence or any sort of merit, but through swindling people, through cheating workers out of humane and fair wages, out of the exploitation of not only third world nations, but also domestic workers in wealthy countries as well.
Since there's only two places money can come from, one being the private sector, and two being the printing press, and since you can't rationally finance an economy off the back of the printing presses, it would lead you to hyperinflation. Since your only option is left to turn to that of the private sector in order to finance your economy. And since you want to abolish that, tell me how you're going to finance the economy. Because without that, you're left with no money. Unless you're talking about a moneyless based economy. Now you could talk about the economic calculation problem because you would be in the absence of prices. However, never mind that argument for a second. You talk about exploitation, so what do you call getting people to work for 0% wage for endless hours?
Wages are stagnant despite massive increases in productivity, yet we are told we live in a meritocracy. That, if you work hard, you'll righteously be compensated for your work. In reality, these are all lies. Work harder, longer, more efficiently, for less and less scraps. Your hard work isn't enriching you, it's enriching your boss.
I agree that people do deserve paid better wages. However, you make it sound as if the consumer gets nothing in return. You see, that's how spoilt my generation really have become. You're so spoilt, you can't even see the computer sitting in front of you.
Corporations export jobs to the third world because there's more profit in it for them over there.
They export it to these countries like China because they cannot afford to produce it in their own home country. And a large part of that was to blame on President Obama.
They pay their workers slave wages and sell whatever is produced to markets with relatively wealthier consumers in the West. These incredibly patriotic corporations and their CEOs are choosing to betray their own countries, their own people, by shipping millions and millions of jobs abroad just so they can profit more.
I've seen these countries improving in their wages, and see if it wasn't for that work they were getting, they would be dying on the farms. Yes, they have these factories and things like that, the sweat houses and stuff, but how do you think Great Britain became what we are today? We got here because of the factories.
This is an inhumane and impersonal system. Capitalism needs unemployment to function. If governments wanted to end unemployment, they could. But why would they? They serve the interests of the rich, and it's within the interests of the rich to have a massive army of unemployed people outside their workplaces, so that they can keep their workers docile. Employees know better than to ask for higher pay, better conditions, and benefits when there are 300 people ready to take their job in a heartbeat.
The truth of the matter is, see when you're up against fierce competition in a free market and businesses have to compete against one another for skilled labour, it means they will pay more in wages because they have to compete with one another for skilled labour. So there goes that entire argument flying right out the window.
A system that relies on constant unemployment is an inhumane and destructive system.
A full employment level is not sustainable, and this was something that was touched upon by Henry Hazlitt. He's even dedicated an entire chapter on that, which I will post below within the description area so you can go and read it for yourself.
It's a system that chooses to keep millions unproductive with their time for the sole purpose of profit.
Unproductive. Seriously, a socialist sat there and said capitalism, the most productive system on planet Earth, is unproductive. Given the very fact that the private sector is the productive sector and the public sector is the leech sector, where did you get that logic from?
Not only this, capitalism needs war. War opens up new markets. It lets foreign corporations invest in countries that don't want the investment.
It's not the fault of the free market. That's not the reason why we go to war. And trying to connect and correlate that of what governments do has got nothing to do with capitalism, so that argument just goes flying right out the window again. That's to blame on your socialism.
It lets the natural resources of other nations be stolen from them, all for the sole purpose of profit.
You mean imperialism, which is a collectivist socialist system? Yes, exactly.
I think we can all think of a war in recent memory where this was the main reason. Capitalism goes against human nature. Human beings are an intensely cooperating species. In fact, capitalism can't exist without human cooperation.
Human nature is something that is based on individual self-interest, and human beings are naturally self-interested, and that's why it defies socialism. So yes, capitalism actually does pertain to that of human nature, because capitalism is predicated around the individual having their own freedom to do as they please, so long as they do not infringe upon another individual's rights.
But capitalism rewards selfishness and greed and every man for himself mentality.
Again, this every man for himself argument is just completely false. It's predicated around this idea that it's not caring about other people, ignoring the fact that capitalism is about a charitable system that helps the less fortunate. Adam Smith's own argument about the invisible hand, without people realising it, just from having the business there, benefits other businesses around them and other consumers, just from the very presence of the butcher. To say that it's every man for himself is a clear misunderstanding of the invisible hand, and is a clear misrepresentation of what capitalism's about.
Which damages people's minds and their communities. We are told that capitalism praises freedom and individualism, but it destroys freedom and individualism for everyone but the capitalists themselves.
Again, that argument is erroneous, and the 19th century of the United States of America pretty much backs that very evidence, like I had pointed out before, where wealth disparity did not go to the hands of the rich. In fact, it was pretty much equal for much of the 19th century in the United States for a very lengthy period of time, until government started to intervene in the late 19th century. Surprise, surprise.
The vast majority of us who work for a living are daily asked to uncritically follow orders, to act as if we are machines, and limit our creativity to what profits our bosses.
So what exactly are you expecting? The fact of the matter is, the boss is the one that created the company, that made it all possible in the first place. And if it wasn't for the boss, the company wouldn't be there in the first place in order to give you a job in the first place. So you wouldn't have one. If it wasn't for the, boss of the company, he's got every right.
We are told that capitalism is efficient and innovative. This remains to be seen. Parallel development of the same technology is a massive waste of resources.
That's not the fault of capitalism for the reason why there's a waste of resources. That's the fault of your socialist government interventionism, where every single mixed economy is faced with the economic calculation problem. And you want to know why that problem was caused? Because of all your socialist government price fixing, etc.
Billions of dollars are spent every year on advertisement, basically manufacturing demand for products no one needs, diverting resources away from actual social problems that plague society.
Here we go again, producing products that people don't need. Who gives you a goddamn right to say what people need or don't need? And these things actually improve their material standards of living, and I've got to laugh at the hypocrisy of that, considering the fact you're sitting there with video software and a computer. So I guess you don't need that then? Your argument's laughable to say the least.
Capitalism also destroys innovation and stifles creativity, and that can be seen in another video I've made. Link is in the description.
Where the hell did you pull that information from? Where did you actually pull that from? The Industrial Revolution was one of the most innovative time periods in world history.
Capitalists denigrate and spit on cooperation and collectivism, but they create mass production processes that rely on both from the workers. Their system requires us to be cogs in a giant profit-making machine, but because they fear the power this gives us, we are told working together for our own interests is illegitimate.
The reason why Henry Ford's automobile industry came around was simply because, not of a government bureaucracy, but because of an individual having the freedom to think for himself.
And bad. Thus, capitalists undermine unions and other organizations that encourage workers to cooperate with each other and act collectively, again, all for the purpose of profit.
You mean the same trade unions in Great Britain that tore the arse at the British economy and led to high unemployment rates and was driving the economy towards hyperinflation and were dictatorial and led to an overmanned industry, such as that of the coal industry in Britain?
Capitalism is an inherently dictatorial system of minority privilege and class rule based on the private ownership of means of livelihood. This gives a few rich people the power to buy and sell jobs, which means they can build or destroy entire communities that depend on those jobs.
Aye, they created these jobs and absolutely decimated society, so much so that between the 1780s in the United States of America, right up to about the late 19th century, you actually saw the masses come out of poverty. So much so that the average poor person of society was far richer than what they ever were.
They can ruin many lives, all for the profit of a few. Capitalism is a system in which the principle of $1, one vote dominates that of one person, one vote. Those who own the most shares, bought with their own money, with their own dollars, control giant corporations, many of which are more powerful than all but a few governments. Rich people also use their money to dominate the elections that are supposed to give us all one equal vote.
Again, this is to do with corporatism. This is nothing at all to do with capitalism. You are religiously trying to correlate corporatism with that of capitalism. Now, for you to lobby for socialist government regulations to stamp out competition, you're not practicing capitalism at all.
Under capitalism, those with the most money are entitled to the most goods and services as well as the most say in directing our governments and our economy.
The bottom line is, I wouldn't even support a democracy to begin with. One part of the population gets to impose its will on another part of the population, which is just completely wrong.
Through lobbying, capitalism stifles democracy and generally makes a dictatorship of the rich, a dictatorship that cannot be questioned. The perfect example of this is the United States itself.
How is that a perfect example of the United States of America when the United States of America is a constitutional republic?
Where a massive majority of the population want free education and universal healthcare, yet every attempt at doing so is just, well, stopped in its tracks.
Of course it's stopped in its tracks, because the United States isn't a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. Do you know the difference between a constitutional republic and that of a democracy? You were born in the United States of America and you don't even have a clue. You've not even got a clue. You don't even know what your own country's like.
Capitalism is not a friend to democracy, but ultimately its enemy.
Given the fact that democracy is where one part of the population imposes its will upon another part of the population through force, I'm not surprised why capitalism's an enemy of it.
When pushed, capitalists choose capitalism over democracy. If people use democracy to weaken the power of the capitalists, the rich and powerful turn to various forms of fascism in order to keep their privileges.
The part where you try to pass off capitalism as something to do with fascism, even although fascism is a collectivist system and collectivism is a word synonymous to the word socialism, in other words, is a variant of socialism.
Rather than being a system based on human wants and needs, it's based on the interests of a wealthy minority. What they say goes, regardless of the democratic will of the majority.
Again, it's not a democracy, so it doesn't matter how many people vote in the United States. You live in a constitutional republic.
Capitalism proclaims the virtue of naked self-interest, but self-interest without regard for morality, ecology, or common sense, which leads to environmental degradation, destruction of indigenous communities, colonialism, war, and other forms of mass destruction.
Do you mean the colonialism that's a collectivist system that's inherently socialist?
Naked self-interest for the benefit of society is as ridiculous a notion as having everyone drive on the road without paying any attention to traffic lights and stop signs.
A bit like the ridiculous argument of getting rid of the private sector and then expecting people to work for free.
There will be many accidents and problems, as there are with our economies and societies right now. Self-interest leads capitalists to seek profit absolutely everywhere, regardless of the damage done to other people and the health of the planet's ecosystem. Self-interest leads capitalists to destroy any rival economic system or way of thinking that can be a barrier to their endless quest for profit. Capitalism is a cancer taking over our planet. Capitalists make profits from global warming, from destroying our oceans, from pumping ever more chemicals into the atmosphere, and from patenting everything they can, including life itself. Only by getting rid of capitalism can we rescue our environment and...
Yeah, let's rescue humanity by going back in a time period in history before the Industrial Revolution, where as a result of your communal ownership of agriculture, the communal ownership of property, there was periodical famines. I would seriously love to see you try and justify your wonderful collectivism with your collectivist ideologies like imperialism and colonialism, and your collectivist ideology of fascism, and your collectivist ideology of communism, and then try telling me how wonderful collectivism really is. Because see, when it comes down to it, capitalism's got absolutely nothing at all to do with imperialism or colonialism, because capitalism's an individualist system, and that fact you even admitted to yourself. Earlier in the video, you stated that it is about individualism, so you acknowledge that fact. So what's that got to do with all the stuff like imperialism and colonialism, which both are inherently collectivist? Exactly. You see, that wasn't so hard now, was it?
Internationale, mes noms staan gelijk.